Well, this is the SE3 that you've been sort of watching me refurbish and tidy up this week. I just thought I'd just have a little sort of overview of this before we or rather I, give it a steaming, just to make sure everything's working fine. This is this curious one which, as I'm sure you know, has this sort of very odd push button whistle which seems to have the normal sprung whistle body, but with this sort of insert at the top which you can push down with your finger. In some respects it's a much easier, much simpler design. I don't know why it wasn't adopted. This one also has these screw-on cranks which has like a threaded crankshaft, two lock bolts which go on next, and then the actual cranks themselves screw on so that they're attached to the shaft that way. It's a little bit thicker than the normal SE3 crankshaft. I don't know why this wasn't adopted. Perhaps the cranks, the supplier had a problem getting them through or whatever, or they were looking at ways of, like Malin's always did, of rationalising their manufacture and finding a cheaper way of doing it. But it's not a common occurrence. I've seen it on a number of engines. I've seen it on an SE3, a Griffin and George variant, and it seems to be around the period, sort of, I don't know, late sort of 67, maybe through to about 71. I can only guess that sort of time period, when also they had this curious hammered green paint, which I've sort of noted looking at lots and lots of engines, seem to occur around about at the introduction of the SE2A and the SE1A. I don't actually dislike it in some respects, although I think the sort of minty green is a little bit more sort of more friendly a shade of green. Excuse me. And as you say, you can see the cranks on there, and you can see that these screw on, and then there's a bolt inside there which screws on to the crankshaft across the entire flywheel. This one, because these engine frames were loose, I've tried to get these sort of lilac pop rivets pushed down a little bit more, but I've sort of squeezed it in that way to make it a little bit tighter by fitting some shims or washers on this side, and hopefully that will make it run a little bit smoother, because I think it might have just rattled and clanked around. There was a bit too much sort of end float this way if I hadn't put it in. There's the curious whistle. You can see that it's just literally a push button affair on top, exactly the same in some respects as the normal whistle. I don't know whether the body looks a little bit thicker than the normal sprung whistle, but I think the sound will be the same. But it literally just pushes down. It's almost like a safety valve in itself in some respects. The rest of the engine, let's say, I haven't polished it using any brass or anything at all. You can see the shine on that boiler, and there's some lovely coloration and patination on there. It literally was just covered in oil, in gunk, God knows what it was, literally dried on, and in many respects it probably hasn't been steamed a great deal. It's been steamed a fair few times, but the lacquer on the boiler seems to have stayed put basically on there, and so I've decided not to polish it at all. So basically everything on this has just been polished by hand, just using a dry rag, a little bit of mess and some detergent to get the worst of the deposits off, and it all seems to move freely. There's nothing else which needed work on. One of these pins was a little bit bent, and I've put a new seal on the overflow here. You can see some, whatever they call it, dezinkification or whatever it is on the end. I gave that a sort of a light rubbing with some very fine emery cloth, and wiped it out, and just to get rid of the worst of it. It's where the water dribbles off and it forms some like crusty deposits on the actual boiler itself. But apart from that, everything else was as it should be. I had a spare lamp, so I'm using that one on this one now. I might ultimately put a new decal on here, because the one on there is a little bit chipped, but all in all I'm sort of extremely pleased with it. It's a nice sort of addition to the stable, and you know, it's not often that they come up with this strange variation. I have no idea why Malin's did it. I have no idea how long it lasted. Maybe it was just a couple of years, maybe a year, maybe only for a batch of a few hundred engines, while they establish a new supplier, because the cranks on the original SE3s were used right up to the SP5 with the cast crank with the Mamod on there and the little grub screws that held them on. I think maybe in some respect these look a little bit more sort of purposeful and less sort of toy-like in some respects. Perhaps that's just my opinion. But let's say they sort of screw on just right, so you get like the 180 degree sort of timing separation. So while this one's at the top dead centre, that one's at bottom dead centre, they're slightly a little bit off, which is good in a way, because it enables you to when they're really well running, you set the flow up in such a way they can almost like self-start. It does mean though, because of the screw-on type cranks, you can't experiment with the timing, so you can have, like face of the other type of crank, you can undo the grub screw on here and turn it around so they both push together, a bit like an old British vertical twin sort of Triumph or Norton. I'm sure Triplett will know what I mean by that. So anyway, there you go. So I'm sort of rather boringly calling it a unusual SE3 variant, and it will shortly be in Steam, and hopefully nothing will be amiss. And let's say ultimately it will be sort of coupled to a small workshop or whatever, and I'm no doubt will be making an appearance at Steam Toys in Action this year. I'm still trying to decide on what I'm actually going to take to that yet, but I've got a few ideas of the sort of direction I want to take it this year. So there we have it. So that's the third SE3. As I've said in some of my posts, at one point I had 7, possibly 8 of these things, but I think that's a little bit too much. And it's a nice addition, a nice variation, one that you don't see often, and you certainly don't see that whistle very often at all. I've seen it on these, and only on obviously an SE2A, which was equipped with a whistle as well. I've seen one on that before. I thought it was a broken sprung type whistle, but you know, after seeing it a couple of times, then obviously you realise that it is an actual manufactured one. So there you have it. So if you bear with me, we should hopefully get some steam up a little bit soon, and we'll see how this little beauty performs.